For years of marriage, every Valentine's Day, Marcus brought women home, locking Grace in the bathroom and forcing her to listen to their intimate acts. He made her change the bed sheets and clean the room. In the 7th year, he brought Summer to the dinner party, ordering Grace to take off her clothes for Summer to wear, even demanding her wedding sapphire jewelry. Guests snickered as Marcus grabbed Grace's hair and sneered, "What are you without me?" He then publicly bet 10 million that Grace wouldn't dare to leave. No one knew this was Grace's 101st time saying she wanted a divorce, and it would be her last. Every day after their marriage, Marcus would bring a woman home to stay in their bedroom. He locked Grace in the bathroom, forcing her to listen to their sounds. Calling it a lesson for her, he forced her to personally change the clean bed sheets and clean the home. At the Valentine's Day dinner party in the 7th year, he brought Summer, who was wearing a white dress. He forced Grace to strip naked so Summer could wear her clothes and your wedding sapphire jewelry. "Give it to her too," everyone whispered, waiting to see Grace humiliated. "I want a divorce," Grace said, her voice so calm it felt unfamiliar even to her. Marcus froze for a moment, then grabbed Grace's hair. "How many times have I told you, don't try this with me? You don't even know how to please a man. Who would want you if you left me? I bet 10 million she won't dare to leave," he declared dismissively. Turning to the crowd, people responded eagerly. Some bet 500,000, others 1 million, wagering that Grace wouldn't dare to divorce him. But what they didn't know was that this was Grace's 101st time asking for a divorce, and it would be her final farewell, one in the luxurious restaurant. The light from the crystal chandelier shone on everyone's faces, but Grace stood alone in the shadows. Marcus walked in through the main entrance, his arm around Summer's waist, greeted by applause and well wishes. Summer was wearing a cheap white dress, yet she deliberately stared at Grace with a provocative gaze. "Grace, come here," Marcus beckoned, a hint of malice in his smile. "Tell me, does this lady's dress suit my banquet tonight?" Marcus asked, looking at Summer's dress with utter disdain. Grace remained silent, knowing what was about to happen. "Take off your starlight and give it to her," Marcus commanded, his voice not loud, but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. The gown was Grace's graduation project from the university design department, which had won an international award and was the only piece she had kept. "Mr. Marcus, I don't think, and that set of sapphire jewelry I gave you. Hand it over to her too," Marcus interrupted, his voice growing colder. The people around them whispered, some covering their mouths to chuckle. "She doesn't even know how to please a man. She needs others to teach her," Marcus said, glancing around, eliciting a burst of laughter. Grace stood there, feeling her blood run cold. "I want a divorce," Grace said, her voice so calm it felt unfamiliar even to her. Marcus froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. "This again. Grace, I'm tired of your act. I bet 10 million she won't dare to leave," he declared dismissively. Turning to the crowd, people responded eagerly. Some bet 500,000, others 1 million, wagering that Grace wouldn't dare to divorce him. "I bet she will," a deep voice cut through the crowd. Grace looked towards the sound, seeing Ethan standing in the corner, his tall figure accentuated by a dark blue suit. "The divorce papers will be delivered to your office tomorrow. Remember to sign them," Grace said, taking the pre-prepared documents from her handbag and placing them in front of Marcus. Marcus's smile froze. He seemed not to have expected Grace to be so resolute this time. Grace turned and went upstairs, retrieved the starlight and sapphire jewelry, and returned to the main hall to hand them to Summer. "This dress needs special care, and so does the jewelry," Grace said, her tone calm. "As if giving household instructions. Before you," Marcus brought back 6 other women. They all stayed on the 3rd floor of the East Wing. Each one thought she was special, Grace added. Summer's smile faltered. Grace turned to leave, but Marcus suddenly grabbed her wrist. "You think you can just walk away like that?" His eyes darkened as he pointed at Summer's shoes. "Kneel down and clean her shoes." The entire room fell silent, waiting to see Grace humiliated. Grace slowly knelt, mechanically wiping Summer's high heels with her dress hem, her heart already dead. After finishing, Grace stood up, ignored all the shocked stares, and walked straight out of the banquet hall. Just as Grace was about to step out the door, Summer's sharp voice came from behind her. "Grace, don't think I don't know how you married Mr. Marcus back then." Grace paused, her back to Summer, and didn't turn around. Your mother drugged you and sent you to Mr. Marcus's bed, then publicized it widely, forcing the estate to take responsibility, didn't she?" Summer's voice carried a malicious laugh. The murmurs in the banquet hall ceased. Everyone was waiting for Grace's reaction. Grace slowly turned around and saw Summer proudly wearing Grace's starlight, adorned with Grace's sapphire necklace, and walking in the high heels Grace had just cleaned. "Mr. Marcus told me you're like a dead fish in bed. Completely clueless about pleasing a man," she continued. "No wonder he looks for women like us, who know how to have fun." Marcus stood beside her, a look of amusement on his face, as if watching a show. "And your brother? A good-for-nothing, always lying in the hospital. Only good for spending Mr. Marcus's money." Summer knew Grace's weakness. "Shut up." Grace's voice was low. What did you say?" Summer put her hand to her ear exaggeratedly. "I can't hear you," I said. "Shut up." Grace suddenly yelled, her voice echoing through the banquet hall. Summer was startled by Grace's reaction and took a step back. "What right do you have to talk about my brother?" Grace strode towards her, her steps firm. I was just repeating what Mr. Marcus said." Summer began to panic. "Take off my dress," Grace said, her voice as cold as ice. "What?" I said. "Take off my dress now," Grace articulated slowly. "Grace, are you insane?" Marcus stepped between them, shielding Summer. Grace looked at him and suddenly laughed. "Marcus, it's been 7 years, aren't you tired of this? You bring a different woman home every year, force me to serve them, and watch me make a fool of myself. Is that so amusing? Is your hatred so profound that you must crush my dignity bit by bit before you'll stop?" Marcus frowned. "You know why I hate you, because of that misunderstanding 7 years ago. Because you think I set you up?" Grace gave a bitter smile. "It's been 7 years, and you've never once thought to uncover the truth. The truth is your mother drugged you to marry into wealth, and even took photos to brag about it." Marcus roared. "But have you ever considered that I was a victim too?" Grace calmly retorted. "I loved you, Marcus, before everything happened. I truly loved you." That sentence seemed to affect Marcus. His expression softened for a moment. Summer saw the situation turning unfavorable and quickly interjected. "Mr. Marcus, don't listen to her nonsense. She just wants to trick you into forgiving her." Marcus's gaze turned cold again. "Grace, do you really think I'll believe you?" "I don't need you to believe me," Grace said, "but I want my dress and jewelry back. They are mine. They don't belong to anyone else." Grace stepped forward, reaching out to unclasp the sapphire necklace from Summer's neck. Summer shrieked and recoiled, lost her balance, stepped on the hem of the dress, and fell to the ground. "Ah!" she cried out, her arm grazed by a glass on the floor, blood trickling down her fair skin. "You did that on purpose," she accused, her eyes filled with hatred, pointing at Grace. The gown was also ripped, and the pendant of the sapphire necklace fell to the ground, its gem dislodged. Grace looked at the torn dress and broken necklace, her heart aching. They were her last cherished possessions. Now also ruined. Marcus shoved Grace aside and knelt beside Summer. "Summer, are you all right?" He gently wiped the blood from her arm, his concern evident. "Marcus, it hurts so much," Summer sobbed pitifully, throwing herself into Marcus's arms. Marcus picked her up, then turned to Grace and said, "Grace, this is your true self, full of jealousy and resentment. You don't deserve anything good. Get out of my sight. Don't let me see you again." Grace stood her ground, feeling everyone's contemptuous stares, and suddenly, a sense of liberation washed over her. "Fine, I'll go," Grace said. She bent down, picked up the shattered pieces of the starlight and the necklace remnants from the ground, and tucked them into her pocket. "But don't forget to sign the divorce papers, Mr. Marcus," Grace reminded him one last time, then walked out the door without looking back. Back in her room, Grace locked the door, leaned against the wall, and slid to the floor. Late that night, a phone call broke the silence. "Ms. Grace, your brother's condition has suddenly worsened. He needs immediate surgery. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible." Grace's heart pounded. Her brother was her only family, and his treatment had always been funded by the estate. Grace rushed out of her room, ran to Marcus's door, and knocked frantically. "Marcus, please open the door. Leo is critically ill. I need to go to the hospital." Laughter echoed from inside, but no one answered the door. Grace continued to knock, her voice laced with tears. "Please, at least lend me money for the surgery." The door was yanked open. Marcus stood there in just a bathrobe, and Summer was hiding behind him. Grace, trying that a pity act again. Who would be critically ill in the middle of the night? He scoffed. Summer peered out from behind him. Grace, isn't your brother already beyond saving? Why waste money? My brother still has a chance, can't you? If your brother dies, it's because you cursed him to death. Stop bothering me. Marcus sharply interrupted Grace. Slamming the door shut, the sounds from inside became more wanton, as if deliberately provoking Grace. Grace stood at the door, despair washing over her like a tide. Back in her room, Grace looked out the window. It was the second floor. Grace picked up the desk lamp and threw it at the window. The glass shattered instantly. Cold air rushed in. Grace ignored the pain and climbed out the window. Grace jumped from the window ledge, landing heavily on the snow-covered ground. The pain nearly made her faint, but thinking of her brother, Grace struggled to her feet. It was a harsh winter night. Grace walked barefoot on the snow, each step leaving a bloody mark. The biting wind chilled her to the bone, and her vision grew increasingly blurry. A beam of headlights suddenly illuminated the path ahead. A black sedan stopped in front of Grace. The car door opened, and Ethan rushed out. Wrapping his overcoat around Grace, "Grace," he exclaimed, his eyes filled with alarm, as he pulled her into the car. "Leo, hospital." Grace mumbled weakly, then passed out. The hospital lights were blinding as Grace was wheeled into the emergency room. After an unknown amount of time, the red light above the operating room extinguished. The doctor emerged, took off his mask, and shook his head regretfully. "I'm sorry, we did our best." Grace stood there, feeling her soul being pulled from her body. Leo was Grace's only remaining tie to this world, and now he too was gone. Marcus arrived late, seeing the failed surgery result. He coldly said, "It's good he's dead. A release for him. It saves you the burden, and me a lot in medical expenses." Grace looked up at him, his face twisting into a grotesque monster in her eyes. Grace's heart died completely. She could no longer shed tears. 3 days later, it was Leo's funeral. Grace wore black mourning attire, standing in front of the funeral, receiving condolences from family and friends. Ethan stood by Grace's side, silently offering her tissues and warm water. Summer arrived uninvited, dressed in a vibrant red dress, a new diamond bracelet from Marcus on her wrist. She walked up to Grace and feigned sympathy. "Grace, my condolences. Your brother's death was so sudden." Grace ignored her and turned to adjust Leo's memorial portrait. Summer walked to the altar, feigning sorrow, and accidentally damaged Leo's memorial portrait. "Oh, I'm sorry," she exclaimed, a flash of triumph in her eyes, and whispered, "He was useless anyway. He should have died sooner." A rage Grace had never known burned through her. She snatched a nearby vase and smashed it violently against Summer's head. The vase shattered against her forehead. She shrieked and fell to the ground, blood streaming down her face. Marcus rushed over, shoved Grace aside, and cradled Summer in his arms. "Grace, are you insane? Summer, are you all right?" He gently wiped the blood from Summer's forehead. "My head hurts so much. She tried to kill me." Summer sobbed pitifully, leaning into Marcus's embrace. "Apologize to Summer." Marcus roared at Grace, "Then pay her $200,000 for emotional damages." Grace watched their act coldly, her eyes devoid of emotion. "I'll go get the money," Grace said, turning to leave, her back straight. Back. Grace retrieved the jewelry box her mother had left her and all her design sketches, then headed to the pawn shop. These were Grace's last possessions, and all her dreams. After getting the money, Grace returned to the funeral and threw the cash in Summer's face. "Get out of my brother's funeral," Grace said, her voice icy. After's funeral ended, Grace took out her cell phone and dialed Ethan's number. "Ethan, take me away now," Grace said, her voice resolute. The next morning, Marcus woke up in bed, habitually waiting for Grace to bring him hot coffee and an ironed shirt. After waiting for a long time and Grace not appearing, he got out of bed in annoyance and pushed open his room door. "Grace," he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. It was unusually quiet. There was no scent of breakfast, no movement from servants. Marcus frowned and walked to Grace's room, pushing the door open to find it empty. The bed was neatly made, as if no one had slept in it. He opened the closet. All of Grace's clothes were gone, leaving only a few items he had forced her to wear. Marcus's heart suddenly clenched, and an unfamiliar sense of panic washed over him. He quickly walked to the vanity table. The drawers were empty, all of Grace's makeup gone. On the floor was only a crumpled paper. He picked it up and saw it was an early design sketch for the Starlight. It was Grace's work from university, with his signature and a small heart from back then in the corner. Marcus's hand began to tremble. Scenes of their first meeting suddenly flashed through his mind. It was 8 years ago. Grace was running down a corridor at the design academy when she accidentally bumped into him. "I'm so sorry." Grace apologized frantically, her design sketches scattering across the floor. He bent down to help her pick them up and was drawn to one of the sketches. "Did you draw this?" It was the initial concept for the starlight. Just simple lines, but already revealing extraordinary inspiration. "Yes," Grace said, a little shyly, "but it's still very rough." "No, it's beautiful," he said seriously, like the brightest star in the night sky. In that moment, Grace looked up at him, her eyes sparkling like stars, and a pure smile touched her lips. Looking back, that was probably the most beautiful smile Marcus had ever seen on Grace. Later, he often came to the school to find Grace, taking her to various exhibitions and fashion shows, supporting her design dreams. They had once sat side by side on the rooftop on summer evenings, sharing a can of beer and talking about the future. "When I graduate, I want to create my own brand," Grace said excitedly. "I'll support you, no matter what you do," he said, lightly kissing Grace's forehead and making a promise. Back then, they believed love could conquer all. Until that fateful night, Grace was drugged by her mother, waking up to find herself in Marcus's bed. Photos were spread like wildfire. The estate faced an unprecedented scandal, and there was no longer any tenderness in Marcus's eyes, only hatred and contempt. On the first Valentine's Day after their marriage, he brought home the first woman, forcing Grace to watch their intimacy and mocking her disgrace. Grace knelt on the ground, begging him to believe her, but he only said coldly, "Grace, this is what you deserve." For 7 years, it was like this every year. Grace's heart was gradually worn down. No longer capable of feeling pain, he thought Grace's silence was surrender. But he didn't know it was the beginning of her heart's demise. Over 7 years, Grace gradually lost her smile, her dreams, and finally, even her self-respect dwindled, and he, while enjoying the pleasure of revenge, also lost the girl he once deeply loved. Marcus cast aside his memories, rushed out of the room, and ordered the housekeeper, "Get the surveillance footage." On the surveillance footage, Grace smashed the window, climbed out covered in blood, leaving a trail of crimson footprints in the snow. Then's car stopped, and he carried Grace away. Marcus's face turned ashen. He had never seen Grace look so desperate. On the screen, Grace was still clutching something tightly in her hand as she was carried away. Marcus zoomed in on the image, clearly seeing the fragments of the starlight and the remnants of the sapphire necklace. In that moment, his heart was cut by a knife. Remembering Grace's words at the banquet, "I loved you, Marcus, before everything happened. I truly loved you." He sat in the surveillance room, questioning his own actions for the first time. For 7 years, he had never given Grace a chance to explain, only punished and humiliated her relentlessly. He recalled the first time Grace made him breakfast, clumsy yet full of love. He remembered the first shirt Grace designed for him, not perfectly tailored, but the most comfortable one he had ever worn. He thought of the time Grace was sick, and he intentionally came home drunk, yet secretly got up in the middle of the night to check if she was getting better. Those details he had deliberately ignored now surfaced one by one before his eyes. An unprecedented bitterness welled up in Marcus's heart, the taste of regret. "Marcus, Grace is just playing hard to get. She's probably hoping you'll go find her right now." When rushed in, she had only a small band-aid on her forehead, and her makeup was impeccable. Marcus looked at her with cold eyes. "Your injury wasn't very serious, was it? How did it heal so quickly?" Summer froze for a moment. I really was hit hard by her yesterday." Marcus ripped off the band-aid from her forehead. Beneath it was only a faint scratch. "You lied to me?" Marcus's voice was low and dangerous. Summer panicked. "No. Marcus's gaze turned icy. "Get out of my home. Don't let me ever see you again." Summer tried to plead, but she was dragged out by the bodyguards. As she was leaving, she shrieked, "Marcus, you regret it." Too late. Grace isn't coming back. Those words were like a knife, sharply piercing Marcus's heart. "Yes, it's too late," he murmured to himself. 7 years. Why am I only realizing this now? He returned to Grace's room, lay on her bed, and inhaled the lingering scent of her hair on the pillow. In the first year of their marriage, they had also shared brief moments of tenderness. Grace had tried to understand his anger, to tolerate his coldness. Even after he brought home the first woman, She secretly prepared a birthday cake for him. When he found out, he threw the cake directly into the trash. That night, Grace hid in her room, crying silently. He stood outside the door, listening for a long time, but ultimately didn't knock. On the second Valentine's Day, he brought home a second woman. Acting even more outrageously than the first time, Grace began to grow numb. No longer crying, no longer protesting, merely mechanically completing every task he assigned. He thought Grace's silence was surrender, but he didn't know it was the beginning of her heart's demise. Over 7 years, Grace gradually lost her smile, her dreams, and finally, even her self-respect dwindled, and he, while enjoying the pleasure of revenge, also lost the girl he once deeply loved. Marcus called everyone he could, searching for Grace's whereabouts. Investigate. He ordered his subordinates find, no matter the cost. As the investigation deepened, Marcus gradually learned the truth about the setup 7 years ago. It turned out Grace truly had been wronged, yet he had punished her for 7 years because of it. The moment he learned the truth, Marcus almost collapsed to the floor. 7 years, a full 7 years. He had used the most malicious methods to punish an innocent person. And that person was the girl he had once loved most. Grace. He whispered her name, his voice filled with pain and remorse. That night, Marcus drank an entire bottle of whiskey by himself. Passing out in Grace's room, he dreamt of the day they first met, dreaming of the starlight in Grace's eyes and the smile on her lips. When he woke, his pillow was damp. It was the first time he had cried in 7 years. Marcus sat in the empty bedroom, looking at their old photo, feeling heartbroken regret for the first time. 3 months passed, and Grace had vanished without a trace. Marcus lived every day in pain and remorse. He went to Grace's brother's cemetery, bringing a bouquet of white roses, and knelt before the grave, murmuring apologies. He visited Grace's university campus, sitting on the bench where they first met, reminiscing about the past. He even sought out Grace's mother, the mastermind behind everything. Grace's mother was already enjoying her later years overseas, spending the money from the estate. Utterly unconcerned about Grace's plight, Marcus retrieved the old photograph and evidence, completely cutting off Grace's mother's financial resources. Only then did he understand how lonely and helpless Grace had been for 7 years, without family support, without a husband's love. There was only endless humiliation and hurt, yet had lived on, strong, for her ailing brother, for that last glimmer of hope in her heart. "I'm sorry, Grace," Marcus murmured to himself, gazing at the starry sky outside the window. One day, his assistant rushed in. "Mr. Marcus, we found Ms. Grace." "Where?" Marcus shot to his feet. "She's participating in a design exhibition under the name Juan, opening tonight." Marcus immediately rushed to the exhibition hall, pushing through the crowd towards the center. Under the spotlight, Grace stood beside a dazzling gown, her expression confident and composed. This gown was even more stunning than the starlight from years ago, eliciting continuous admiration from the audience. Beside, Ethan stood in a sharp suit, acting as an investor, his gaze filled with pride. Marcus rushed over, wanting to grab Grace's hand. "Grace." Ethan quickly stepped in front of Grace, his eyes cold. "Mr. Marcus, please show some respect." "Grace, I know I was wrong. Please forgive me." Marcus's voice was hoarse, his eyes glistening with tears. "Without you, I'm nothing," he continued, trying to get past Ethan. Grace looked up at him, her gaze as calm as if she were looking at a stranger. "Mr. Marcus, we are already divorced," Grace said, her voice completely flat. Marcus stared at Grace in shock. "When? I didn't sign anything. Your assistant signed on your behalf. The full power of attorney was personally signed by you." Ethan scoffed. Only then did Marcus recall that during the days Grace was missing, he had entrusted many documents to his assistant. "Additionally, my lawyer will contact you regarding the evidence of your company's alleged commercial crimes. We already have it," Grace said. Ethan added, "Marcus, what you owe Grace, I will make you repay twofold." Marcus's face was ashen as he looked at Grace in disbelief. You can't do this to me. I really love you." His voice trembled. A reporter approached. "Excuse me, are you the original designer who was suppressed by the Vents for years?" More reporters gathered, camera flashes illuminating the area. "I'm just a designer, currently focused on my own brand," Grace answered gently. Completely ignoring Marcus's presence, Marcus was pushed to the side, his heart aching as he watched Grace's composed demeanor under the flashing lights. He remembered 7 years ago, when Grace stood at her design department's graduation exhibition, her eyes shimmering with the same light. Back then, he had stood in the audience, proudly applauding Grace, but now he could only be an outsider, watching others cheer for her. Marcus quietly left the exhibition and got back into his car, where he cried openly for the first time. He cried for his own foolishness, for the 7 years he had lost, and for the love that could no longer be salvaged. After that night, the Vans faced an unprecedented crisis. Ethan's company and the media simultaneously exposed years of Vance's commercial irregularities. Stock prices plummeted, and partners withdrew their investments. Overnight, Marcus went from a business elite to a public enemy. He came to Grace's design door, kneeling in the pouring rain. "Grace, please see me," he pleaded, completely drenched. Grace came out of her design, opening her umbrella, ready to leave. "Grace," he called out, "do you remember when we first met? You were wearing a white dress, and your smile was like spring sunshine. Do you remember the first gift I gave you? That blue bracelet you said you'd wear forever?" Grace stopped, raindrops dripping from the edge of her umbrella. "Mr. Marcus, those memories and the Grace who loved you, they died on that snowy Valentine's night 7 years ago," Grace said. Grace walked past him without even a glance, leaving him with only, "You'll have to deal with the consequences." Ethan stood silently nearby, holding another umbrella for Grace. They walked away side by side, leaving Marcus kneeling alone in the rain. A month later, Marcus was arrested for multiple commercial crimes and sent to a correctional. The group completely collapsed. Grace's design brand grew increasingly successful, and her works gained international recognition. Old wounds transformed into design inspiration, every stitch and thread telling a story of rebirth. The starlight may have faded, but dawn would always come. This time, Grace no longer lived for anyone else. She shone only for herself. The 7th Valentine's Day had passed, and this year, no one was brought before Grace. Grace stood in her design, watching the snowflakes fall outside the window. Ethan pushed the door open and walked in, holding a cup of hot coffee. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Just thinking this snow is much lighter than 7 years ago," Grace said, taking the coffee and a faint smile touching her lips. Life held countless possibilities, and Grace had never imagined she would find rebirth in this way. The old Grace, willing to endure all humiliation for her brother, had received not a shred of warmth in return. The current Grace had learned to love herself first. Only then could she give love to others. "How are your new collections coming along?" Ethan asked. "They're finished," Grace said, walking to the workbench and lifting the cover cloth. A gown full of vitality and hope was revealed. No longer reminiscent of starlight, but of the rising sun. Ethan's eyes sparkled with awe and pride. "This is your best work, because this is the real me," Grace said. "Some say the end of a relationship takes as long as its beginning to heal. 7 years of pain would also need 7 years to heal," but knew that the moment she walked out of the estate's gates, the healing had already begun. The shadows of the past would not completely disappear, but they would become part of what forged the new Grace. Ethan never asked about Grace's past with Marcus. He only cared about her present and future. "Are you ready? The brand launch is about to begin," he said, extending his hand. Grace nodded, took his hand, and together, they walked towards the spotlight. That night, Grace's new brand Phoenix officially debuted, signifying rebirth from ashes. The media vied to report on this designer brand that rose from the ashes, and Grace's story became an inspiring legend for many. No one knew the pain behind it, and no one needed to know. Those scars had already healed, becoming a part of Grace's life. Backstage at the launch, someone handed Grace a letter, saying it was from a fan. Grace casually opened it. Inside was only a photograph of Marcus in the correctional. He looked haggard, yet his gaze was fixed on the camera, as if he knew the photograph would reach Grace's hands. On the back of the photograph, it read, "I repent every day, hoping you can forgive me someday." Grace put the photograph into the paper shredder without a moment's hesitation. Let the past be the past. Grace didn't need to live in memories. Ethan walked over, saw Grace's action, said nothing, and simply squeezed her hand gently. This was why Grace liked him. He knew when to speak and when to remain silent. "Grace, there's an interview asking you to discuss your creative inspiration," he said. Grace nodded, adjusted her collar, and walked towards the waiting reporters. "Ms. Grace, the public is very curious. Where did you go during those 3 months you disappeared? A reporter asked. Grace smiled. To find my true self. What are your thoughts on your ex-husband Marcus being sent to a correctional? Another reporter pressed. Grace's expression remained calm. I hope everyone takes responsibility for their actions. It's rumored that Marcus wrote a memoir of repentance in the correctional. Have you read it? No. I've turned that page, Grace said, her voice firm. After the interview, Grace and Ethan walked towards the parking lot. Are you tired? He asked, looking at Grace with concern. No. I feel quite light, Grace replied, leaning against the car window and gazing at the city lights. Life's turning points often happen in an instant, just like Grace was forced to marry Marcus 7 years ago. And like she decided to leave 7 years later, every choice had shaped the person Grace was now, for better or worse. In's design, her team was busily preparing the next season's collection. They were all young designers Grace had carefully selected, sharing the same dreams she once had. Grace hoped to provide them with an environment where their dreams wouldn't be crushed. Ms. Grace, what fabric should we use for this piece? A young designer asked, holding a sketch. Grace looked at the design. Velvet, I think. It has a better feel, but the cost will be high. She hesitated. Good design deserves the best materials, Grace said with a smile. Don't worry about the cost. Just make what you believe is best. The young designer's eyes lit up. She nodded gratefully and left. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching the scene. You're a good boss. I just don't want them to repeat my mistakes, Grace said. That evening, Ethan drove Grace to a downtown apartment. It wasn't large, but it was cozy enough, a space entirely Grace's own. Would you like to come in for some tea? Grace asked. Ethan shook his head. No. You need your rest. We can talk tomorrow. 7 years of marriage had made Grace forget how to interact normally with people. Ethan had always given her enough space and time. There was no explicit relationship between them, but they both understood each other's importance. The next morning, Grace received a call from an unknown number. Is this Ms. Grace? I'm with the Central Correctional. Grace's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Mr. Marcus's condition has worsened. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left, and he wishes to see you one last time. I remained silent for a long time. I won't go, I said. After hanging up the cell phone, I sat by the window, lost in thought. Marcus was sick. That certainly caught me by surprise, but no matter what, I wouldn't go see him. He didn't deserve my forgiveness, nor my hatred. I called Ethan and told him about it. Do you want to go? He asked, without any hint of leading me. No, I said, my voice firm. Then don't go. He said, you don't have to force yourself for anyone. I turned back to my work, putting the matter out of my mind. Life is about moving forward, not dwelling on the past. A week later, I was working late at the design when I suddenly received a call from the hospital. Ms. Grace, Mr. Marcus just passed away. He was calling your name until his last breath. I held the cell phone, feeling none of the expected emotion. Thank you for letting me know, I replied curtly, then hung up. Marcus was dead. 7 years of nightmare. Finally over. I walked to the window, gazed at the stars in the night sky, and for the first time, felt true liberation. On the day of the funeral, I didn't go. I only sent someone with a bouquet of white lilies. On the card, I wrote, may you no longer be consumed by obsession in your next life. This was the last shred of dignity I could offer. Ethan asked if I wanted to go to a movie to take my mind off things. I smiled and agreed. Life had to go on. The movie was a light-hearted comedy, but I couldn't bring myself to laugh. It wasn't sadness, but a strange sense of emptiness. For 7 years, whether it was hatred or pain, Marcus had been the focus of my emotions. Now that he was completely gone, I felt somewhat unaccustomed to it. After the movie, we walked down the street. Ethan asked, what are you thinking about? I'm thinking I'm finally free, I said. You've been free for a long time, he said. Ever since you decided to leave. I nodded, then suddenly took his hand. Ethan paused for a moment, then gently squeezed my hand back. We walked all the way home like that, neither of us speaking, yet we both understood each other without words. The next day, my lawyer informed me that Marcus had bequeathed all his assets to me in his will and testament. I don't need it, I immediately refused. And this, the lawyer said, handing me a small box. He specifically instructed me to give this to you personally. I took the box and didn't open it until I got back to the design. Inside was a blue bracelet broken into his first gift to me. There was also a note. I'm sorry, I couldn't love you properly. I tossed the box into a drawer and continued to focus on my design drawings. Let the past be the past, whether it was good or painful. Days passed, and my brand became increasingly successful. Ethan, too, transformed from an investor into an inseparable part of my life. He respected me, understood me, gave me freedom and space, yet stood firmly by my side whenever I needed him. A year later, at my brand's anniversary gala, Ethan knelt on one knee in front of everyone. "Grace, I can't promise to give you the absolute best, but I can guarantee it'll never hurt you," he said. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sorrow, but tears of happiness. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice filled with nervousness and anticipation. I didn't answer immediately, as countless images flashed through my mind. The 7 years of nightmare replayed before my eyes like a slideshow. "You don't have to answer now. I can wait," Ethan said, standing up and wiping away my tears. I shook my head, took a deep breath, and said, "Ethan, yes, I will, but I need time." "We have all the time in the world," he said with a smile. After the anniversary gala, I went alone to Marcus's cemetery. His name and dates of birth and death were the only things carved on the tombstone, without any ornate words. I placed a bouquet of white roses down and stood before the grave for a moment. "I forgive you, and I forgive myself," I whispered. "This is our last meeting. Goodbye." Leaving the cemetery, I felt a lightness, as if a long-held burden had been lifted. Ethan was waiting for me outside the cemetery. Seeing me emerge, he stepped forward and asked, "Feeling better?" I nodded. "Let's go home." 6 months later, I walked towards Ethan in the wedding gown I had designed myself. It wasn't the starlight, nor the morning gown, but a phoenix symbolizing rebirth. On a red base, gold threads outlined the pattern of a phoenix rising from the ashes, magnificent yet dignified. "You're beautiful," Ethan said, looking at me, his eyes full of love. "Thank you for waiting for me," I said. We exchanged vows, kissed each other, and began our new life. At the wedding, someone asked about Ethan's and my story. I simply said, "We are each other's salvation." Life wouldn't always be smooth sailing, but with the right person by my side, even storms became beautiful. 3 years later, we had our own child, a lively and adorable daughter. I named her Dawn, symbolizing light after darkness. Every time I saw her innocent smile, I thanked life for giving me a chance to start anew. Marcus's presence in my life was like a 7-year nightmare. After waking up, I discovered how bright the sky was, and how beautiful the world. Sometimes I'd wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't been forced to marry him. But those hypotheticals were meaningless now. What mattered was everything I had: my brand, my family, my love, and the self I had found again, every day. Ethan would give me a small gift, not jewelry, not a bouquet, but a design sketch. On it, he had drawn me as I looked in college, based on his memories from back then. "I want to remember every version of you," he said, "the happy, the sad, even the desperate ones, because all of those are you, and I love the complete you." 10 years later, when I received the 10th sketch, I asked Ethan, "Do you regret meeting me?" "Why would I?" he asked, looking at me with confusion. "I came with so many scars, so many painful memories," I said. Ethan held my hand. "Grace, those scars shaped the person you are today, and it's that very person I love." I leaned on his shoulder, once again grateful for fate's arrangement. In the end, life is about looking forward. The past is over. The future is what's worth looking forward to. The who was tormented by Marcus for 7 years had died. Now, I finally lived for myself. Every time I saw Dawn happily running, every time I saw Ethan's gentle gaze, I would tell myself, "It's worth it, everything is worth it." Only those who have crawled out of hell truly cherish the sunlight. The starlight no longer shone for him, but for myself and for the people I loved. This is my story. It began with the 101st heartbreak and ended with endless warmth. I am Grace, a woman of rebirth from ashes.